Just a few seconds about that video. Julia Nurbin, who you saw speak here from Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light, will be here Saturday, and one of the workshops is just solar, along with Bob Lake, who is one of their solar developers, who's also working on a exciting program with returning citizens, training folks coming out of prison to do solar work. So if that at all intrigues you, sign up for the Saturday workshop at the 3rd slot.
Stand up. Oh. So it is my great pleasure this afternoon to welcome you to our panel conversations and to introduce you to our moderator, Dr. Laurel Kearns, professor of religion, sociology, and ecology at Drew Theological School, where she has taught religion and ecology for 25 years. She has been in this work for a long, long time, and she is a fount of hard-won wisdom of what it means to transform the work of the church in the world in this time when it is so desperately needed. She is you heard religion, sociology, and ecology. So that means she studies, like, how do we actually do it? So she is the one to talk to when you need not just smarts, but like deep, deep wisdom. Laurel is the co-founder of the Green Seminary Initiative, which aims to help
We'll get another one.
So, please help me welcome Dr. Laurel.
Thank you. Actually, one of the greatest things about being at this for so long is that I get to meet people like Ginny Phillips when she was just starting out, maybe almost 20 years ago. Yeah, and it's been great. Well, I am really, really honored to be here and to be part of this. I will confess I have been around Methodists so long that I use the word we, and I'm very good at John Wesley, but I am technically a Quaker still. But I can't imagine a better place to be than to continue the work that I have been doing ever since Drew brought me. Is it? Yes, it's me. No, I'm just saying technology doesn't like me. I always do this to something. Is it better now? Is it where I keep this? Anyway, I just want to remind you as our panelists start to come up, the framing questions for the panel to consider, because we want you to consider them also. They are in your booklet, but sometimes they sound different when you hear them. In an age of widespread ecological degradation threatening human, I'm going to add the word creaturely and planetary well-being, in which many are called for a global ecological conversion. And I sense that many in here have long been converts. Of mindsets, lifestyles, systems, and I'm going to add actions. What unique charisms and assets might the United Methodist Church offer the Church Universal, offer the planet, the globe, offer other faith communities you want to work with, and the world in this great work, as Thomas Berry has called it, of our time? And what are your big hopes and dreams for the mission, ministry, and witness of the UMC on creation care and creation justice? Additional questions to consider. What opportunities exist for creation care ministries that you wish more local United Methodists would engage? What are other movements, activities, individuals that you know about that we can learn from and be involved in to deepen our mission, our ministry, our witness, our action for the care of creation? And what are you excited about right now? What's inspiring you? What's motivating you as it relates to creation care and climate justice? Well, our panel, and we have two of them today, have also been asked to consider this. And we're doing a sort of modified fishbowl on all this. And you might have been entertained during the break as we decided, should they be up there? Should we be down here? Should they be in the middle? And this is what we set upon. But part of what we hope is that the fishbowl, for it to work, is we want you at some point to feel free to come up, occupy one of these chairs, give us your thoughts, and I will be the moderator and the timekeeper for this so that we make sure everybody gets a chance to speak. So I'll be scanning the audience, looking for who might want to come forward, but you can, as the panelists finish, you can start coming forward on your own. But before we get started, after I've now had this wonderful introduction, I want to introduce the folks that keep me going and keep me inspired because of the work they do. And the first speaker today, we've mixed it up already a little bit, is going to be Dr. Tim Eberhardt, is Assistant Professor of Theology and Ecology at Garrett Evangelical Theological Seminary and an elder in the Dakotas Conference. At Garrett ETS, Dr. Eberhardt teaches and writes in ecological theology and environmental ethics, directs a new MA in public ministry, oversees a concentration in ecological regeneration, and he's also active in several environmental justice organizations in the Chicago region. And I just want to say I saw him on the screen yesterday for the Green Seminary Initiative as he was telling the other schools involved in it all that's going on at Garrett. It is so exciting what's going on at Garrett. Actually, it's really exciting what's going on at all the Methodist institutions, almost all of them, I'll say. But I'm just really excited about what they're doing at Garrett. Next, we're going to have Marcus Briggs-Cloud, who is Muskogee and is the director of the, I've been practicing this, which means I'll goof it up now, of the Ekin Efolicic. Close. I said this 10 times. And intentional indigenous Muskogee eco-village community that practices linguistic, cultural, and ecological sustainability. He hails from down my part of the world, which is the South, and also I know right now is at the University of Florida, right? Doing PhD work, and really important. And just been thrilled to get to meet after we've had many common friends over the years. Liz Lee, as y'all know, serves as the executive for economic and environmental justice at the UMW, the United Methodist Women, my heroes for a long time. Liz serves as the lead staff to advance climate justice, which is one of 4 issue priorities for the UMW. She works on mobilizing members with UMW's Be Just, Be Green jurisdictional guides and engages in program and advocacy development and strategic partnerships with the goal to reduce greenhouse gas emissions with just transition. And I just have a personal note here. When I was a little tiny grad student, the UMW and their work on this was already teaching me. So I learned a lot from UMW over the years, and that was back in the 80s. Y'all have been great on this. John Hill, another person I hope all of y'all know already, serves as the Assistant General Secretary for Advocacy and Organizing for the General Board of Church and Society. I can actually do the initials if you need me to. I took a course in Methodist initials. Every new seminary professor needs a list of, agency initials. He works to educate, equip, and mobilize United Methodists across our global connections who are putting their faith into action to protect God's people and God's planet. So we really look forward to hearing from y'all and your thoughts. And then we look forward to hearing from y'all and your thoughts. So take it away.
I'm sorry about the microphone situation. We thought we had 5 working microphones, but it seems like we only have 3.
Honored to be part of the panel and most importantly part of this conversation. And I'm going to focus my remarks on the first prompt. What unique charisms and assets might we United Methodists offer the Church Universal and world? And as a faculty member at one of our institutions, I could answer that question in terms of the resources of our United Methodist seminaries and divinity schools. And there's a lot to share here, and a lot here that's exciting. I could briefly note over the last 4 to 5 decades, the enormous number of courses taught in ecological theology, environmental ethics, and more the books that have been written, the conferences that have been held, the initiatives that have come out of our seminaries and divinity schools, the urban farms, the seminary farms, the community gardens, and more. And I think it's also important to note that our seminaries and divinity schools are some of the places, not the only, but some of the crucial places where environmental concerns are placed alongside issues of racism and the sins and the evils of genocide and sexism and, right? Our seminaries and divinity schools are places where this kind of broad intersectional analysis takes place. That said, what I want to focus on, the way I want to answer this question is at a more basic level. And that's at the level of the theological vision or imagination that we, the people called Methodists, have been gifted with, that we steward. Because I think there's an important contribution that we might make here at this particular moment. So if you pay attention to what's been happening in the environmental movement over the last several decades, at least in some circles, you'll see a shift from a focus upon sustainability as the orienting language and focus, right? We are to sustain what we have been given. We are to steward it and hand it over. We are to preserve and conserve what we have, toward a more recent focus upon the language of resilience. Because in an age of widespread climate change, biodiversity collapse, biospheric disruption, it's not realistic to say that we're going to be able to sustain and conserve what has been. Things are already changing and quite rapidly, in quite disturbing ways. Now, alongside this, you see the kind of the spectrum of those who sit on one end, who speak about apocalypse, about collapse, the kind of doom and gloom scenarios. And there are good reasons to think about, anticipate, and work through these. Alongside of that, you have a growing number of those who are using the language of regeneration, placing a kind of dogged hopefulness in the regenerative capacities of the earth and its or her systems, and the capacities of human beings to actively participate in the regeneration of degraded landscapes, degraded systems, the degraded biosphere. Well, isn't that interesting? As a United Methodist, as one shaped by the Wesleyan Methodist tradition, regeneration is theological language. It's in fact the spiritual language that flows into and out of the Wesleyan Methodist tradition. So I believe there's a role here for a tradition, a denomination, that is capable of holding together both a kind of a hard realism about where we find ourselves, what we've done, and what we face, alongside this kind of energetic hopefulness in the real present possibility of transformation. So, like the rest of the reformers, Wesley took seriously the destructive, the alienating effects of sin and evil. But unique among the reformers, and I think this is perhaps where one of our charisms might lie, Wesley also preached and lived and organized around a deep and abiding confidence in God's power to bring about new life, a new creation. And regeneration was one of the words he used. So for Wesley, this was a confidence that was rooted in what some Wesley scholars call his holistic understanding of salvation. Salvation not just for the future, but also for the living present. Salvation not just for the soul, but for the body. Not just the new heaven, but a new earth. Not just about forgiveness, but about healing. Not just about individuals, but primarily about relationships. And not just about human relationships and human divine relationships, but the healing of relationships with the whole of creation, what our Dakota brothers and sisters would say, all my relations, or all my relations, all creatures, right? This kind of holistic, integrative vision. And ultimately, not just a theoretical, abstract notion of salvation, but a living, practical understanding of salvation. So here I am, and I find myself continually running into environmental movements that are using the language of regeneration, regenerative agriculture, that doesn't just do less harm, but actually does good by building biomass, by restoring biodiversity, right? I see urban designers using the language of regenerative cities or regenerative architecture, regenerative economies. And I think to myself, this is work for United Methodists. This is our work. This realism about the destructive effects of what we've done, but this kind of a confidence and assurance that something new might emerge that leads us to engage and to act in that direction. So let me stop there.
Tsahodif kat kanvaski ahola doan yat yamada dala kaya damigana do kodundes and madambuna kapuna iba andres. Tsahodif kadun man simona hen man imalega roza kodundes and mahoda gagi pujidoes. Mo en tsapuja dadi malega fuswagi do much. Amiste gidat mati maskoga gidu yat Hobayin azimat hasosavatsa gayhozat mat Alabama mat takabuga ka didundes and mastimith kedini owi dumo vadan mat pumajuligidadi dat mat hasakalat ka fatsa sabije zagaridun ayuat dat mat pumiganadari legat dat mayifulijit fully to is. My name's Marcus Briggs Cloud. I'm an indigenous Muskogee person, and I'm a son of the Wind Clan people and a grandson of the Bird Clan people. And I just want to acknowledge the Dakota people whose territory we're on here, and hope that their ancestors are not offended, or their contemporary peoples are not offended by use of my language, or they're probably offended by the use of English, but I guess we can't do anything about that. My people, we're actually the first people that John Wesley ran into when he came here. He met a woman named Mary Musgrove from our people from the Idalwa, the village of Coweta, and they went back to England, and he said some pretty crappy things about my people. But we've been Methodist for a long time. My in-laws have been Methodist ministers for like 5 generations. It's become part of the cultural fabric of our people today, and I just want to mention a few things that I think. I'm a part of the Oklahoma Indian Missionary Conference. For those of you that aren't familiar, in Oklahoma there are 2 conferences, those for the almost all white Methodists and some black Methodists, and then all the Indian Methodists. And that's the first conference in the colonial state of Oklahoma. So we were forcibly removed from our homeland in Alabama in 1836, and most of our people were sent to what's now colonially called Oklahoma, and some of our people went southward to what's now colonial called Florida, and that's where I reside and direct a language immersion program. And as you heard earlier, that I direct an eco-village community. We reclaim some of our ancestral homeland in Alabama to establish this eco-village, which I'll talk about later as a part of this initiative that we're going to discuss later. But in terms of needs, I think that the church can play a role in perhaps some theological changes that we're in need of. In the OIMC, where I'm active as a worship leader every year for our annual conference, we really have a difficult time incorporating, ironically, indigenous theology into the things that we do, because we're so colonized and we hate our indigeneity. We want to be so white so bad. And so when I think about even this name, creation care, it's creation is the product of a creator, and the creator in this Western paradigm that we've been introduced to is a male, and that male is not indigenous, and that male God does not like what we do as indigenous peoples. And so it kind of devalues the personhood, too, of the earth. So we can't refer to the earth as Earth Mother and give her personhood. My uncle, every time a sacred bird, the wakatlako, would fly over, or the fushatka would fly over, my uncle would always say, "Mado fushwaduita tihijayat shajafat koshidos." He would say, "I give thanks to you for seeing you has filled me up." And our people have a hard time doing that, those that are Christian, because they feel they have to say, "Thank you, God, for showing me this bird," because of that whole idolatry thing, like ringing in the back of our minds. I can't give thanks to the bird. The bird doesn't have personhood. It's God. It's all about God. And I really love the exercise that we did here with these elements, because it's actually the fundamental cosmology of my people. The worship, the words, and this is by no means any negativity toward the selections on part of the worship committee, but it's because we're at a loss for worship that has a theology that I would push for anyway, one that gives personhood to all these elements of the natural world. We don't have the lyrics for songs. And when I in our own annual conference, when I tried to introduce new music like this, I get all the flack for it, and that's too Indian. Put it away. And that we smudge in the beginning here. I tried that too at an Indian conference, and you know how many Indians walked out? And I just want to say that we need better songs, because we internalize all that we worship, right? And then we live that. And then lastly, too, that I feel that I went back to do a PhD. One of my classmates here from Harvard Divinity School, woo-woo. But I honestly got burned out in theology after I finished divinity school and pastored for a year, and then wanted to go study in the hard sciences, and so that's when I pursued the PhD in ecology. But after studying all the science, I decided that really the answers are in the ethics and the theology. I have a friend of mine that's a big environmental justice advocate, and she's always telling me now that she wants to go study theology. She's an attorney, because she needs the theology to change people's minds. And I think that a lot of us can agree on that. And so we have the power in the church to do that. So I'm going to... last thing is that we do need more education at the local church level about environmental issues and things like... I'm sure those of you that are from small congregations or lead in regions that have small congregations love styrofoam, love plastic. I mean, those are like things that we can rid ourselves of at the very basic level, right? And instead of these huge issues that we all feel we can't pioneer or tackle. So we need more education why that styrofoam is bad. And convincing our people it's not just because in our context, some white person said it was. We need to break it down and show how this coincides with our traditional indigenous ideology. And that's after we decolonize our theology. But, so it's a lot of work.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Lee, as Laurel had mentioned. And I actually grew up Presbyterian, PCUSA, but was drawn to Methodism from an early age. We had youth pastors who were from the United Methodist Church. And one of the things that I remember, some of our debates, we're a fairly academic bunch of youth group students, and we talked about free will versus predestination in 7th grade. And I was drawn, to John Wesley in terms of free will, right? Drawn to this praxis. And I was coming from more of a Korean American Presbyterian church, so sometimes we got involved in TULIP, for those of you who are involved. But instead, the focus of Methodist theology of God has given us a choice. in terms of, do we choose to be part of life and creating life and being part of the creative process that God had endowed in all of us, and we celebrate that, or do we, woe is me, I am a sinner, and I know so many passages in Korean and in Romans of, oh, what a wretched man I am, who can deliver me from this bondage of death and sin? And instead, while we're recognizing that, Tim, as you were speaking about, that God has given us this immense creative ability and power. So that is my kind of draw, I think, even from a 7th grader, to Methodism, and then the praxis, that I think that is a unique charism. Again, we're not stuck on some of the academic, analytic theology. That's there present too, I guess, in all theological circles, but seeing what does the context mean? How is God moving? What are the sins? What are the issues? How do we repent? How do we move forward? And what does this kingdom look like? So I've been drawn to Methodism and United Methodism for those reasons. Another reason is the role of the laity. I am lay. I went to seminary, but I'm so staunchly lay because it is the work of the people of God, Laos, right? That God compels us, moves us forward. And that is where I think the hope will be, not only in the clergy, but the power of the laity. So United Methodist Church is embedded throughout the United States, across political spectrums, from the Republican, Independent, Democratic Party, and also many of our membership are in the dominant majority. And US is the main beneficiaries of the causes and the impact of climate change. So we have an ethical, moral responsibility and imperative to move forward. But how do we do it? How do we move forward? I think one thing is that we in the United Methodist Church, we need more people working on addressing climate change and advancing climate justice. But it's not that people don't care about these issues, it's sometimes the way we frame it. We talk about the sciences, the hard data. We talk about language of climate change and 2.0, 2-degree scenario, 1.5-degree scenario, et cetera, or talk about the polar bears, which are important, but what if we change the language? And what if we talked about how it's impacting communities? And something that we've been doing with United Methodist Women, we've been doing an engagement with Chevron to reduce greenhouse methane emissions specifically because it's 87 times more potent than carbon dioxide over a 20-year time period. And we don't talk about the science alone, but we talk about the impact in fracking communities that 40% of pregnant women are more likely to have preterm births, which is the leading cause of infant mortality. Or what about asthma rates with African American communities and Latino communities? If we began with that, or migration or displacement, instead of starting with technical science. That's one. How are we framing the issue? Another is, who do we involve and what is our approach? And I value very much the Jimenez principles that was developed in 1996 by the Southwest Network for Environmental and Economic Justice, that we should be inclusive, that we should emphasize bottom-up organizing, let people speak for themselves, work together in solidarity and mutuality, build just relationships amongst ourselves, commit to self-transformation as well. And I think about the Universal Declaration of Indigenous Peoples, which speaks about free, prior, and informed consent. And that framing of, are we bringing those who are being impacted or have been impacted, and in terms of the causes of climate change and the impact, are they part of the decision-making process, and even in our dialogue as well? One of the things I'm really excited about is not only saying we stop, but we focus on solutions, and even the video that was presented earlier. That at United Methodist Women, we're focused on reducing greenhouse gas emissions from the biggest emitting sectors, and we're talking to entities like Chevron and big corporate polluters, but we're also wanting to have a vision. What is our direction? We want clean, renewable energy for all that ensures just transition. And saying, how do we do that? How do we strategize around that? So one of the things that we've been looking at within United Methodist Women is focusing on utilities, right? So one is the supply, the source of the supply, or oil and gas companies, but another is the demand side, and who's distributing it. So we're saying, well, we could talk to public utility commissions, we could talk to the utilities, put some pressure on them, and say, we demand clean, renewable energy. And if we did that in all of our various locations as United Methodist, that would be pretty significant as 7 to 8 million members of the population. And there's a study that says that if you have 3.5% of the population, you could bring about radical social change. So think about how many members we have in the United Methodist Church. You know, we can contribute to that 3.5%. We don't have to get everyone. So think of us on this ship. If we get part of the ship, moving the direction of the ship, we don't need to move everyone inside of the ship of the United Methodist Church to agree with us. But if we're moving the direction of the church towards that 3.5% that moves towards renewable energy, that could lead us to a future where we're part of that regenerative solution. So thank you.
I'm always very wary of following Liz, or any United Methodist woman, in fact. I'm John. I work with the Board of Church and Society in DC. For those who aren't familiar with Church and Society, you know, our work is generally to give life to the social teachings of our church, to make sure that what we say, we believe, and we debate that every 4 years. This round, we're doing it a second time in 2019. But that those words don't just sit on a shelf somewhere and gather dust, that we actually live into them, and that we challenge those systems and structures that prevent them from being realized. I work in Washington, D.C. There are a lot of systems and structures right now that are preventing our words from being realized. It is not a place of tremendous hope. When I look down at these questions we were sharing in our small group, my sign of hope is not coming out of leadership in DC right now. My signs of hope are coming out from communities here, from relationships, from folks who are standing up, rising up, using their voice, and really fighting back against the oppressive structures and systems right now. When I was reflecting on these questions and then just listening to the conversation this morning, it feels to me that at the core, what we offer as a church are two things. First, that our ministry is all relational. And second, that we have hope, right? And those two pieces are often missing in the conversations, particularly around climate justice. At Church and Society, we get a lot of feedback on social media and in other places. I generally never scroll down into the comment section. But a lot of times folks say, you know, well, the church shouldn't be involved in those issues, right? We hear that all the time. It's not the position of the church to get involved in these issues. I was at a Global Young People's Convocation just 2 days ago in South Africa, where there was preaching about how we shouldn't be involved in issues. And I get that we don't want to be, you know, always entering places of division. But what we shared was, you know, we don't enter these conversations because of some abstract academic exercise. We enter them because of the realities that are impacting our neighbors, who we love, and our families and our communities, and as a matter of justice. And I think framing that, and Liz was talking about that, right? Framing it not as some scientific abstraction, but as a reality that is an urgent crisis damaging folks that we love, changes the way we talk about it, changes the way that folks would push back on us. I think the other piece for me about relationships is that we have to enter them with some humility. I've been a part of this work for a while now. I've been at the Board of Church and Society for 16 years. And for a lot of times we look around in our movement and say, like, why aren't others joining us? That's a common refrain. Right? And this happens both in the church and in the broader climate movement. It's like, why don't they care? Why aren't they over here? To me, you know, maybe it's about us moving our place to where folks are, right? And joining their movements, joining their conversations. And it's in those relationships that we can truly listen to the deep dreams, fears, anxieties, hopes of others, and not listen to them just so that we can find out what supports our agenda and that we can move forward, but listen to them deeply. And I appreciated the preaching this morning, right? Sitting with, instead of speaking, and I realize I have a microphone right now, but sitting and listening and hearing the hopes and dreams of our neighbors. And that's what we do in the church, right? That's what we're called to do. And I think that is a gift we offer to the climate movement, that too often is about a particular agenda and only utilizing relationships in advancement of that agenda. And the other piece that I think we're in a moment of, and one of the questions asked, what have we learned from other movements? I think just in the past year, we have seen the church mobilize in a fierce and amazing way to protect our immigrant, migrant, asylee, refugee neighbors. And that, I think, is a reflection of how if we love something, if we know something and we love it, we will protect that fiercely. And I worry that in this movement, sometimes because it's an abstraction, that we don't necessarily have that deep love that causes us to step out in uncomfortable ways, in fierce ways, to take action. And so I look at how we might better reflect the conversations that are happening around immigration in our church. And I think that at its core, again, is because the folks who are most on the front lines being impacted are calling us to step out. Thank you.
Well, because everybody was so well behaved, we said 6 minutes, and we are 5 minutes into what we first thought was going to be our time frame. But the idea was that we really wanted then to invite you to come forward. And these are the things I heard that you might want to say something more about. For one thing, John Wesley. As I said, John Wesley has been deeply inspirational to me. I think finding out, my favorite quote is that John Wesley said, "To not see the face of God in every creature is indeed a kind of practical atheism." To not see God in the bird that flies by, that is atheism. And that has meant a lot to me as a former evangelical. So maybe some of you might want to come forward and talk about the witness of John Wesley, the message of John Wesley, your theological forebears and inspiring moments. But I heard also, what are you doing in your local context? Maybe your pastors, the sort of work of wedding together, as you were so well saying, of ethics, of theology, of science, this combination of what we believe, how we act, what we know about the world. We know John Wesley wrote volumes and volumes on science. That's how important he thought it was to understand God's creation. So how do you see that maybe at work? What I heard from Liz was that call of how do we talk about this? And you all are in settings where you may have real insights into what worked, what caught your congregation's attention or your neighbors or your friends or the organization you worked with. What was the framing that worked? And what I heard John saying also was, what is the listening that you've really gained from? What are those moments when you've learned in ways that have been transformative? Because we do want to talk about what converts people. What I heard from all of you is the stories. What are the stories that you tell others of why you're involved in this? And what keeps you going? I know from all my research that sometimes it's the place that you knew well that's being lost. Others, it may be the creature that looked into your eyes and said, I need to be cared for. I too am a creature of God. For others, it may be the stranger. We have refugees coming because of what is being destroyed in Central America, because of the mining, the deforestation. People are coming to our borders because where they live is no longer habitable. And it may be those stories. So we invite you, come forward, have a seat, speak a little. You can come up, you can come down, but our panelists may also be inspired. But this is what a fishbowl is to have you come up and be part of the conversation. And we'll be gentle on the timing, but I may remind you that there are others to speak. So who would come forward? Up here? We should still leave an empty chair down there for, yeah, right there. Wonderful, come.
Do I need?
Come and take a chair where someone else is speaking.
I'm not going to be here that long. The whole thing about relationship building, and this isn't new probably to anybody in the room, but the power of faith-based community organizing. It's all about relationships, and it's all about people power versus money power. And I think the United Methodist Church has not taken that very seriously. I think we're still into charity and Band-Aids. So I'm just saying I'm with you, John, on the relationships, and that's where the power is. So faith-based community organizing, big plug, that's all I have to say.
But Carol, give us an example, just one example of a relationship that you were part of building that was really important for your work.
Well, I live in Omaha, Nebraska, and I'm a part of Omaha Together One Community, which is faith-based community organizing. And one example, and I live in the inner city in North Omaha, low income. We have a coal-fired plant, environmental racism, and because of faith-based community organizing, working with Sierra Club and other partners, they were able to get that coal-fired plant shut down. And that's beyond charity. That's looking at the systems. That's the intersectionality. Low income, primarily African American community. So that's a victory, and it's a victory of the people over money power.
And I just want to lift up both what Carol said and what others have been, the notion of environmental racism, just to make sure everybody's on that same page. That often where the most polluting, most toxic industries and dump sites are located are where people of color live. And so they bear a disproportionate burden. They bear the cost for those industries, those dump sites, those power generations that all of us benefit from. And so that's part of that notion of environmental racism. Not everybody bears the burden of environmental degradation the same. And when we look across the country, and the UCC, United Church of Christ Toxic Waste and Race report in 1987 started pointing this out, and Methodists were right there pointing this out all along about this connection between who pays the price. So I saw Susan, did I see you starting to come up?
And if you'll say your name and where you're from also.
I'm Susan Mullen. I'm from Brooklyn Park, Minnesota. And I just mostly wanted to just lift up a question for the panel and or anyone else to throw out there. But one of the things that I'm finding is that the scope of the work that we do has to match how bad we see the situation is. And so when we tell people to plant a rain garden or upgrade the lighting in the church, I mean, those are great things to do, but it's hard to get really passionate about the love isn't there, right? I mean, there's a few people that can love a rain garden, right? And that's wonderful. And there's a few people in our churches that can get excited about a lighting upgrade, but to really drive this, there has to be something deeper, and we have to feel like we're connected to a solution that really matters. And that's what I'm hungry for. And I don't have the answer, so I'm going to sit down.
Well, I don't have an answer either, but what you're bringing up is what I liked about John's comment and just about relationship building, but to move a little bit apart from the anthropocentric discourse here, that when you use the immigration reference, but if you're in love with something, you'll protect it, is your comment. And I don't think, I mean, how many of you know how to grow a garden? How many of you have your hands in the dirt? How many of you work with elements of the natural world? Do you know how to forage? Do you know how to pick plants from the forest that are medicinal? Do you know how to eat from the forest? And I think, you know, if we got more of our young people on these kinds of curricula in youth groups, if they knew what plants were good for what, if they knew how to get food from the forest, do they even know how to get to the forest? Do they know how to fish? Do they know how to clean the fish? Do you know how to butcher a deer? You know, these are things that help you fall in love with the natural world. And if you don't have that relationship, you don't know, if you don't have the intimacy, then why would you protect these things?
Do any of our other panel members want to say anything? Just, why don't we just keep that mic down on this end?
So Susan, I don't have an answer. I wish I did. I come from Washington, so I don't have the answer for sure. I do think this is a common challenge, and it's actually a challenge for me that has been sort of consistent messaging, framing issue for the environmental movement for some time, because I think that much of the messaging we get is if we just tweak our lifestyles, it'll be all right, right? If we switch the bulb, it'll be all right. And it doesn't get at the deeper issues. I mean, I've long believed that climate change, climate-related issues are the symptom of an underlying problem of an economy that is dramatically driven by short-term profit and overutilization of resources, and that many of us benefit from that economy. And so it feels like part of the role for us as a church is to push people a little deeper. And to think about what sort of messaging we're sending out as to you know, what brings joy and fulfillment in life that counters the dominant narrative of consumption. And that isn't, you know, a bill that we have to pass. We have to pass bills. It isn't, you know, a prescription of the 6 things you can do, and we have to do those things. But it feels like for us as people of faith, we have to start pushing some challenging some deeper frameworks that I don't think are often named in the environmental community.
Except that the church benefits from that system the system. And I'm just agreeing with you, John, and I thank you for saying that, because it makes me so crazy that the church benefits from a lifestyle that of more and more and more, when we hear churches, be more and more and more, be a bigger church, be a more awesome, bring it, Sarah. We make environmentalism an issue because it gets to be something that's out there, like immigration is an issue, or places in Africa is an issue, because then we're not actually complicit in the system. I'm an environmentalist, and I still want to go to Starbucks right now so badly. I was pissed that it was closed. I should care about that, but the changes that this will require of us, we don't want to make, except that I can't help but think that this is the frickin' gospel where it's supposed to change us. And I don't understand why the church doesn't do that.
Okay, well, I heard...
and your name is?
Oh, I'm Idell Peterson. I'm a member of Centennial Methodist in Roseville. And I heard relationships, and I heard economy, and I heard, you know, how do we get people to realize, you know, that and make the change. And one thing, I think we could kind of tie it all together in that I read a book a couple weeks ago titled The Real Wealth of Nations, and it was human resources. And it's by Rihanna Ellison. There was one sentence in there that really struck me. She said, enlightened self-interest includes concern for others. And I think if we tie it together of listening to people that maybe, you know, aren't on the bandwagon for doing something, climate justice, listen to what their self-interest is and establish a relationship. And they then, especially if they're in a position of being able to do something, like for example, Rex Tillerson, as CEO of Exxon, certainly has the resources. And if we could show it was, if anybody knows him, he might be a Methodist. It might be, they have actually accepted that climate change is happening as a company. And if we could show and convince the people that are in those positions to do something and have the resources to do it, that it's in their self-interest to make a change, for instance, to solar. That's just one part.
I do think sometimes it's hard for Christians to want to appeal to self-interest when so much of our model is about going beyond self-interest. I see a hand back there, but I remember someone around here had stood up first. So, in your name?
My name is Naomi, and I can't remember.
Marcus?
Marcus? Yes. Okay. So you said something, and so anyway, I'm originally from North Dakota, but I live in Duluth right now, and there is a lot of fracking and pipelines going on in North Dakota. Now, those very men, they love to hunt and they love to fish, but yet they think, excuse me, but I've heard them say it, they think the Indians out there are crazy. They do. They're like, I love to hunt, I love to fish, and we're not going to hurt the earth because we're going to be careful. They've said it to my face, and one of them is my husband. And then the other thing, and losing something, I remember going to, it was not one of these conferences, it was actually a journalism conference. And so I moved from the state of Maine to North Dakota, which at that time I thought, this is the most God-forsaken place I've ever seen. But anyway, they were talking about some pollution from these pipelines and stuff, and I had tears in my eyes because I had grown to love North Dakota. And so yeah, losing something you love. And then the other thing I wanted to bring up is in our church, in our League of Women Voters, they watched the movie Bag It, and that really moved some women to really want to do something about all the plastic bags. There was something about that. I've seen it too, but there were a couple women that were just moved to tears, and they actually started doing something about it. And we have something in Duluth that's called For the Love of Place. And it's a nonprofit, but it's not a 501c3. It's just a group of people who say, we love this place, and we're going to try to stop all this pollution. So anyway, that was 3 or 4 things I had to say. Yeah, a lot of guys know how to hunt and fish, but they'll swear to you they're not hurting the earth.
If I may briefly go back to Susan's question, I think the way that the question's framed is right. In light of the enormous ecological crises we face, what unique charisms and assets might the United Methodist Church offer? I think it's important to ask it that way because one, as one of my mentors, ecofeminist Sally McFaig said, and has said for decades, we're at an all-hands-on-deck moment. We need all of the wisdoms, practical, theoretical. We need all the academic disciplines. We need all the ritual wisdoms. We need all the vocations. We need all the professions. We need all hands on deck at this moment, bringing whatever gifts they might have to contribute toward this work of earth repair, earth healing. I think it's also important to frame it this way because it decenters we United Methodists. We alone don't bear all of the resources. And in fact, in many ways, we've been profoundly complicit in the profound destructiveness of the modern political economies and the patterns of colonialism and extractivism and racism, right? So we need to be profoundly humble in critiquing our traditions and how we've been complicit in where we find ourselves. So from there, that kind of chastened humility in asking what small gifts might we contribute, then I think when you look around, I see exciting movements happening all around us, right? So then how do we build power? How do we connect up and bring the gifts we bear, not trying to preserve the United Methodist Church, not to preserve our heritage, but give it, share it, build power, because there are many signs of hope that we recognize the crises all across the board are enormous, and we need profound paradigm systems change. So what do we United Methodists have to bring to that? That, for me, is the question. Liz,
May I make a quick comment? John Dunlop with Hennepin Church in Minneapolis. I think Tim is really highlighting the fact that we really do need to, as United Methodists, really make this our passion, and I totally agree with that. But I think Liz actually hit it on the head. We need to affect more people than just the people in this room and just the people in our churches. We need to affect public policy. And I think that by using our passion and applying it to the right places, we can help Liz change public policy.
Now, the wonderful, patient woman with the, I just see a plaid arm. I haven't, there's her.
I'm Eileen Seeger from Central Kansas, and I have something to share as far as congregations, what we can do, what we have done that some of you may or may not be aware of. I belong to Eastmore United Methodist Church in Marion, Kansas, and in about 1991, we were part of the Kansas West Conference. And Kansas West Conference, I'm not sure how many others, initiated a program called Creation Care. And so our congregation, along with, I think, over 100 more through the years there, maybe 20 years, supported and did the Creation Care project and awarded that to our congregation for 20-something years. I have to think about it. And we participated in that. It was environmental stewardship, environmental witness. I mean, we changed our congregation. We really did with recycling and doing something. And that was in 1991. So when Kansas West Conference sort of dissolved or reconfigured into Great Plains Conference, which now constitutes all of Nebraska and Kansas, Creation Care was dropped. And so I complained. I said, what happened? Well, let us know. We'll try to. Well, thanks to this lady and several others, we have reinstituted it. Yay. And we have a Creation Care project for Great Plains. Now, not to say it is like overwhelmingly popular. It's just in its infancy, and most of, I don't know how many congregations we have. Many more, of course, than we did as Kansas West Conference. So we are trying, and we are publicizing this through our conference now. And we have actually been promised that our bishop is going to do at some point, we keep hoping, I mean, he's agreed to do some video that we can share with our congregations. So I would try to just inspire you to somehow in your various conferences start something like that and set up guidelines and ask your congregations in your different conferences to work on that and do that. It has, I mean, it's been great for us, and I hope that it will keep on going and grow.
So I wanted to see how many, we're going for a break soon, so I just want to ask how many people have we got who would like to speak to the sort of issues that we've been surfacing here? I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, just when you're speaking, keep that in mind that we're going to hear from 5 folks. And Liz, you've never gotten any chance to, I see you with a mic in your hand.
I know, but I recognize the 5. Maybe I can interject after the 5. Because I think participant involvement is so important. So.
Yes, this is what we really wanted, and so we hope you carry this energy into the next part. Okay, since I just heard from over there, I'm going to switch to over here with somebody on this side.
I'm Bill Middlecamp, Rosemont, Minnesota, The Well, United Methodist Church. And I want to talk about the relationship angle. I have 3 anecdotal experiences that were very instructive to me. First of all, in my church community, I am probably at one end, and there's another gentleman who's at the polar opposite end of the spectrum about climate change. And that's a force that pulls our church in different directions, and it's something that I think about a lot and I worry about. I was talking to one of our pillars of our church, a woman who is very wise, and I was talking to her about the science of climate change, and she reflected on how this other gentleman was saying the opposite, and at the end she said, "I know you're right, and I know he's wrong." And I thought, wow, I've accomplished something. But then she didn't do anything about it. And in a conversation I was having with a very wise person, this person said, well, that's because she values the relationship more. She values the relationship more. So there's another gentleman who I work with who we're opposites somewhat, I mean less so. I talked to him about climate change, and he kind of throws stuff in my face. He likes to sort of play the devil's advocate, and at one point I really lost it. I got really angry with him, and I let him know in very strong and very clear language that I was very upset with him. And he came apologetically asking to renew the relationship, which was really powerful. And I took that moment to say, listen, I care deeply about this. I mean, this is the life of my grandchild. I don't think he's going to live to be my age because of this issue. And you mock that. And he said, oh, I'm sorry. I guess I know it's true. I mean, it really does make sense. It's true, but I just don't care. He said, you can prove it to me with all the science, and I just don't care. And I said, well, what do you care about? And he said, I care about my sports teams. And I think he was being, brutally honest, and I think that's important to understand because it is that relationship that he has with his tribe that he values. And to take a stand on climate change would kind of ostracize him or cause him to fall out of favor with his tribe. So that's something that I need to figure out how to address. In fact, he does a lot of things that are really environmentally conscious, and I just called out some of those things one time, and it really changed the conversation. Just showing some appreciation for some of the things that he does. Now, it's still a long way to go before I convert him, but the third...
Bill, I'm going to ask you maybe to keep that third one for the next round, because we had 4 or 5 other people.
Well, this summarizes the point I'm trying to make.
Okay.
So I took in the third relationship that to be the first approach, to call out the things that this person was doing and just celebrate them, and he is a supporter.
So a lot of wisdom in those stories. Is there who else among those 5 wants to speak now or wants to hold till later? Okay, back here in the middle. And then I see a green arm. I'm going to identify you by your clothes.
Hi, my name is Christina Crost. I'm a clergy spouse of an elder in the Illinois Great Rivers Conference. I'm one of the UMW Be Just Be Green jurisdiction guides. And I also work for Faith in Place, which is Illinois Interfaith Power and Light. So I'm kind of doing this work every day in the church and in the community. And the thing that kind of changed the game for me was that I had an opportunity to visit Ile de Jean Charles in Louisiana. You may be familiar with that place, but it's one of the first places where climate refugees are in the United States. and they're an indigenous group of people, and what has happened there is absolutely shameful and terrible. And so to see that there were real people in the United States, about 700 miles downriver of where I live in Illinois, has been pretty powerful, and being able to share pictures and stories of people I met there with people in Illinois, you can kind of connect the river and connect, geography there, that how we are living upstream is really affecting people downstream. So when we talk about polar bears, or we talk about, Pacific Islands and sea level rise, it's really far away. So bringing it a little bit closer to home has been very helpful. So kind of in response to that, I keep trying to act and think of what things that I can do in my little corner of the universe. So at this last annual conference in IGRC, I wrote a creation care resolution modeled off of one passed in the Rio, Texas conference by Ellen Lipsey and kind of a group of UMWs and other organizations down there. So I got a coalition of people to co-sponsor with me, and that was really important. So I had our Church and Society, and I had our Religion and Race, and I had our Committee on Native American Ministries, and I had, as many groups together as possible sign on and co-sponsor this form, with me, and an Earth Keeper, and as many people as I could get to say, let's make churches we're going to encourage churches, right? Because make isn't gonna pass, but encourage churches to have an energy audit and to form a green team, because that way we can take little issues that we might see. Maybe it's styrofoam, and that's really small, but some churches are doing solar, and that's really big. And so, honoring the place where everybody is and kind of just getting started doing the work. And so it passed. It passed really narrowly by like 13 votes, but it passed in central and southern Illinois. If we can do it, a lot of people can do it. So thank you. So that kind of work and building that coalition is something that I think people can do. And the next step, though, there would be connecting with maybe the districts and the district superintendents, and then saying, okay, we've passed this resolution, now what? So giving some support to the churches to be able to do that. And so I'm thinking that's probably going to fall on my shoulders, so I'm gearing up to work on that. So there's hope, but there's a lot of work ahead of us.
And you'd love to hear people with suggestions on what to do. Yeah, so I'm just realizing we're going a little over the time for a break, but I want to hear the green arm. And then Liz, and then we'll take a break. And I'm just thrilled at the energy level in the room.
So I'm going to try to keep it short. For those of y'all who know me, that's really hard. Beth Bond, Atlanta, Georgia, Earth Keeper. I'm so honored to follow Christina because we have been building relationship this year. I have a lot of things to say, but I think that one thing I'm going to keep it in. Susan, one of the ways that actually happened this week in my mind is a way to move forward. John and I were talking about how we want to move things out of the pews. I'm still very focused about what's happening in the pews. My people are like, oh, that's your issue. No, it's not my issue. It's what God has called me to do because I love you and you're a fellow Christian. It's going to affect all of us. I'm still working on that messaging. But secondly, the thing that came out of that conversation we had on Tuesday night is for those of us who are able, we need to be moving into small, appointed, or elected positions in our local communities. So I have served on community council in Decatur for, more years than I like to count. But I can have a sustainability conversation as a person of faith in public format because of that. I hate it, I'm going to tell you. I go 6 times a year. It's the most painful thing I do, but I feel I just feel like it's a place where that voice needs to happen over and over and over again. So even though I'm only supposed to serve for 2 years and I'm on like 8 service things now, I think that's really important. One of the gals on the conversation with us is running for a local water board in Leon County. And if it makes you feel any better, I have caused panic attacks teaching climate justice in rural Georgia when they hear the styrofoam conversation, like where they move all the styrofoam off the table and go dig out the soup bowl. So I think that we need that. One of the ways we can move forward, and it's a small step, right? It's a small step to get an appointment from a county commissioner to serve on community council. But for those of us who can do it, even if it's painful and it's inconvenient, we as United Methodists need to be stepping out and then we'll try to figure out what we can do with the people sitting next to us in the pews.
Now I can count, and I know I've heard 3 of the 5, and so whoever else I haven't called on, please don't lose what you were going to say. But I'm going to turn it to Liz.
Thank you, and amen to that, Beth, what you had said. Yeah, I think, John Wesley, who said, the world is my parish. Yes. And so we take that seriously. We volunteer, we engage in the public discourse as much as we can. I'm thinking about Susan's question in terms of the low impact and high impact, right? Recycling, styrofoam, those things are low impact. And then there's high impact, and EPA's latest, reports that have shown, right, the greatest causes of greenhouse gas emissions in the United States are which sectors? Electricity, transportation first, electricity second, industry third, right? And then it goes to residential utilities, et cetera. But the top 4, the causes are fossil fuels. Right, so if we know it's fossil fuels, then it's a high impact. So how are we going to change the fossil fuel demand, right? Because if we could tackle that, change the demand, the source, all of that, because if we have pipelines, and I hope we're going to be talking about that tomorrow in terms of our some of our actions, if we stop some of the demand, the pipelines, it can lead to high impact. So I feel like for us, those of us who really care, we hunker down on that. What does that mean? We strategize, and all of those things I think can only be helpful in the different ways. But for those who don't care, maybe we don't need to convince them about climate change or the science about it. And we talk about, well, solar is actually better for the environment in terms of pollution, right? And so, it's especially since asthma rates are so high in cities. And if you go to oil and gasthreatmap.org, oilandgasthreatmap.org, Earthworks has done it so that you can type in your zip code and see if what the threat is within a half-a-mile radius of emissions and pollutions, health asthma rates within a half-a-mile radius. So you can see. And if we did, right now here, you can do a map. I was doing, I'm speaking down, where am I? We're speaking with Marcia next week, and so I did San Antonio, right? And in there, it just clearly demarcates the Latino community is disproportionately impacted by oil and gas pollution, right? And so I don't need to convince certain people about the climate change science and 4 degree, 3 degree, 2 degree, all of that, or global warming, but in terms of the health impact that it's having on children, what can we do? Well, there's actually a good solution. Electric cars, CAFE standards, others, or we change our solar panels, and we talk about how solar panel actually installations, it's not jobs that can be outsourced. It provides jobs for people who don't have a bachelor's degree, more for people who are communities of color, pays on average an hourly salary of $25, $26 an hour. So those are incentives, and that there are even municipalities in Texas that have gone to 100% renewable because it made economic sense. So I wonder if part of it is changing the language and what we want to fight about, because I think there are common commitments. If we say we care about children's health and pollutions and asthma rates, let's go there, right? And we don't have to always get stuck in all the debates. But for us, we know where we want to go. We want clean. We want earth. We want reduced emissions.
And as a sociologist, I can tell you all the studies say that's exactly where to go, is to move the focus off the science, move it toward health issues, move it toward who's most affected, bring it into those. In New Jersey, more people die of respiratory than of gunshots. That's sobering. So have a good break. Go take a deep breath, and we should come back in 10 minutes.